Right, Wednesday the 25th of November. This is a recap lesson on the first few lessons in the plant topic. Right, how this is going to work is, there'll be different questions on the screen. Have a go at them. So pause the video and have a go on a bit of scrap paper, and then continue the video and listen to my explanations of that answer. So if you just watch the video, you're going to hear my answers, but what's actually more effective is if you try your own answers first, then review them, and then you kind of figure out the things that you did and didn't know, and the things you didn't know. That's how you make progress, and that's like understanding that there is things that you're good at and things that you're not good at. That's going to help you make progress. Right, so the first thing is, how do plants get the reactants of photosynthesis? So pause the video now and have a little think. Right, the answer is, so plants get carbon dioxide through the leaf, specifically through the spongy layer, which increases the surface area. So carbon dioxide will move in through the stomata and diffuse into the leaf, so it's through diffusion. Right, how do plants get water? Well, this is from the xylem. So water is moved up the xylem. It's transpiration is the key word there. So water is through the roots, transpiration, it moves into the roots through osmosis. It can move through the roots through diffusion, but when it goes over the membrane, that's always osmosis. It then moves up the xylem because it's a sticky molecule, and that's called transpiration. Right, how do plants get light? So again, that is mainly the leaf. So any green bit of the plant that has chlorophyll in will absorb sunlight and do photosynthesis, but it's mainly the leaf. So leaves have really large surface areas that catch the sunlight. So that's how plant gets the different reactants of photosynthesis. Right, next question. What do plants use glucose for? So can you think of 3 things that a plant can make out of glucose? So again, you should be pausing the video now. Right, answer number 1. So it can make starch, and that is a storage molecule. That's how plants store sugars in things like potatoes. So starch is a storage molecule. Second thing plants can make out of glucose is cellulose, and that is what the cell wall is made out of. So it's a big polymer which is made out of glucose. The next thing that plants can also make fatty acids. So fatty acids and glycerol, lipids. So the glycerol bit is made from glucose. So lipids, and also some amino acids and proteins. So it can make important different chemicals from glucose. Right, and the third thing it can do to that glucose is it can use it in respiration. So plants need to do respiration because they are living. At night time there's no light around, so they can't do photosynthesis, but they are still doing respiration at all times of the day and night. So they do respiration, and that takes glucose and oxygen and makes carbon dioxide and water and energy for the plant to live. So 3 things that plants use glucose for. Right, name the main layers of the leaf. So I think you should know the top layer, this one at the top here. The second one down isn't too important, so I would maybe miss that one out. So I'm not too bothered about that one there. We should know this layer, this one here. We should know this next layer here, and we should know this part of the leaf. So can you think, what are the names of it and what are the jobs? Right, top one first of all. So the top layer is called the waxy cuticle, and that's just the very, very top bit. And what that does is it stops water evaporating out of the leaf. So plants need to keep in as much water as they can. So it's a waxy layer. Wax does not let water pass. So if you had a waxed coat, it would be water repellent. Water would just drop off it. Right, next bit. So this is called the palisade layer. And these cells are called palisade cells. It's their job to do photosynthesis. So this is where most photosynthesis happens. So you'll notice the cells underneath that also have chloroplasts. So photosynthesis can happen in other layers, just most photosynthesis happens in the palisade layer, so that's the point of it. Right, the next layer down, so between these lines, this is called the spongy layer. And if you're doing A-level biology, it's called the spongy mesophyll layer. And the point of this is gas exchange. It has a really large surface area to do gas exchange. So carbon dioxide moves in through the stomata. And then if it was just straight into the palisade layer, then carbon dioxide could have moved into the cells through that one layer. But because there's air spaces in here, it massively increases the surface area that carbon dioxide can diffuse into the cell for photosynthesis. So the point of this is it's gas exchange. Right, and the last bit, so the bit on the bottom is called the lower epidermis, and on that layer there's things called guard cells which have little gaps in called stomata, and during the daytime the stomata open so carbon dioxide can get into the plant cell, and at night time these things close to keep water in, because it's pointless opening them, because having carbon dioxide in the plant isn't going to make a difference because photosynthesis cannot happen at night time, so them things close to stop gas exchange. Right, root hair cells. Can you think of 3 adaptations? Right, first one. They've got a root hair. Explain it though. So what's the point of it? Why do plants have a root hair? So you need to say it increases surface area. Why does it do that? So it can absorb more water and more nutrients from the soil. So that's adaptation 1. Adaptation 2 is that these things have got tons and tons of mitochondria. Why do they have many mitochondria? So they need lots of energy to do active transport. Adaptation 3, so they've got really thin membranes, and this is so they can soak up water and nutrients more easily, so it can pass through. And one extra thing there is that so they don't have chloroplasts. I wouldn't say that's an adaptation, it's just a fact, so they don't need them. So I would say adaptations are something things do have. So I've put that one on as a little bit of extra information, but I wouldn't include it if it did say name an adaptation of a root hair cell. I think the other ones are better answers. Right, we need to be able to explain the limiting factors in photosynthesis, and we need to be able to draw and describe the graphs. Right, so a question that could come up is here on this one. So my first question is, what is happening at part B on the graph, or describe what's happening at part B on the graph. So pause the video, have a go. So if the question came up and said describe part B on the graph, a good answer would be, so what's happening to the light intensity in B? So the light intensity is going up. What's happening to the rate of photosynthesis? That is also going up. So you need to say that. So as light intensity increases, so does the rate of photosynthesis. You can also add in this thing, so they are directly proportional. And what you need to say there is, so light is a limiting factor at that point. So a different question to see the difference is, well, what is happening during part C on the graph? So again, have a pause of the video now and see if you can answer it, but kind of use my answer to this one to model your answer to the next one. Right, so on part C of the graph, so you still need to say as light intensity increases, because it's going to the right, which shows you that light intensity is getting bigger, the rate is not changing. You can't really use language to describe the relationship like directly proportional, inversely proportional. There's just no relationship, there's no effect. So what you need to say now is, so light is no longer a limiting factor. And this question could then lead on to another question to suggest how you would then increase the rate of photosynthesis. So you could pick another thing that could be a limiting factor, for example, temperature or carbon dioxide concentration. So you could say you could increase the carbon dioxide concentration to further increase the rate of photosynthesis. Right, the next thing that we looked at was how water is taken up in the roots, and the idea that water can diffuse through the roots without actually going into the root cells, so it can get in between the spaces between the cell walls. So because it's not going through a partially permeable membrane, it cannot be osmosis. When water's going from where there's lots of water to where there's not much, that's just diffusion. Right, so water, if it's going into a cell, has to move through a membrane, but when it's moving through the roots without going into the cytoplasm, then that's just diffusion. You need to use the right language when you're talking about osmosis and diffusion. So osmosis, water moves from a dilute solution into a concentrated solution, but diffusion, things move from a high concentration to a low concentration. So just make sure you're using that language. Another thing you can say for osmosis is water moves from a high water potential to a low water potential. I'm not really sure that we've used that language before, but that is the language that you'll be expected to use if you do A-level biology. So high water potential to a low water potential. Right, I did say in the recap lesson, one thing that we'd do is would compare and contrast transpiration and translocation. So pause this video now and see if you can fill in this table, and then I'll go through the answers in 3 seconds. Right, so what they both have in common is they both are the transportation of molecules. Transpiration is the transportation of water molecules. Translocation is the movement of sugar, namely sucrose. Transpiration is always from the roots up through the leaf, up through the xylem, and then out through the leaves. Translocation is from where sugar is in a high concentration and then it moves to where it's needed. So if in the summertime plants are doing lots and lots of photosynthesis and have lots of sugar in the leaves, they might want to store it in the roots. So that's what carrots and potatoes are. It's just they're root vegetables where plants store lots of sugar. So what they might want to do is they might want to get the sugar from the leaves and store it in the roots. But plants might also, for example, at night time, want to get the sugar that's stored in the roots and take it up to the leaves so the leaves can do respiration with that sugar. So it's not always from the leaves to the roots. It can also be from the roots to the leaves. So you need to use the words that it moves from a source to a sink. A source being a cell that has lots of sugar and a sink being a cell that needs sugar. Right, what vessels are involved? So water moves through the xylem in transpiration. Sugar moves through the phloem in translocation, and companion cells are also involved. If you also need to know the structure of the xylem and the structure of the phloem and how these things work. Right, the next thing is a practical to see the effect on light intensity on the rate of photosynthesis. So how does light affect the rate of photosynthesis? So can you pause the video now and tell me what the independent variable would be in this experiment? A specific dependent variable, some way that you could measure how fast photosynthesis is happening. Have a think about that one. And then a couple of control variables. So what things would you need to control in this experiment? Right, the answers. Right, the independent variable will be light intensity, obviously. And this specifically could be like the distance between a light bulb and where you put your plant. So you could move the plant here further away from the light source. And remember, it's the distance is inversely proportional to the light intensity. The inverse square law is probably the most difficult thing we've done so far on this topic. There'll be a couple of questions on that in a bit. Right, the dependent variable would be something you could measure, might be the amount of oxygen that's produced. So you could count bubbles that come off the leaf. More accurately, you could measure the volume of oxygen with a gas syringe or something like that. As long as you say how you would do it, that's absolutely fine. But yeah, you could capture the oxygen in a funnel and have an upturned measuring cylinder and count the amount of oxygen that is produced in an hour or something like that. So the volume of oxygen produced in an hour might be a good dependent variable. Right, things would have to control. So the temperature would be important because a higher temperature might increase or could decrease the rate of reaction. One way we can control the temperature is we can put a beaker of water in front of the light bulb, which would absorb the infrared radiation, so this would absorb the heat, allowing just the light to pass through. So that is one way we can specifically control temperature. Other things we could control if we wanted to make it accurate would be things like the controlling the concentration of carbon dioxide that the plants have, controlling the pH of the water, the amount of plant or pond weed that we've used. They would have to be controlled to make it a fair test. Right, inverse square law calculations. So as always, pause the video and have a go at this. I'll show you how to do this one, and then I've got a couple of other examples that I really need you to try. Right, the inverse square law, so because it's inverse, that means it's 1 over something, and because it's a square law, we'd need to square that number. So it's 1 over x squared. The lamp was a distance of 10 centimeters. Now it's moved to 40 centimeters, so x here is 4. So if the distance is increased by 4 times, the light intensity is going to go down by 1 over 4 squared. So the distance is going to go, the light intensity is going to go down by 1/16. So if you times that by the light intensity, you'll get the new light intensity. So 1 over 16 as a decimal is 0.0625. If you times that by the initial light intensity, it'll be 312.5 lux is the correct answer. So have a look at my working out there. So what I need to make you aware of is, so x is basically the difference in the distances. So because it was 10 centimeters, now it's 40 centimeters, it's got 4 times further away. So x there would be 4 times more. If it got 4 times less, x will be a quarter. So hopefully that makes sense. Right, there's another couple of examples of them in a bit. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll let you try the other ones by yourself in a bit. Right, 3 things that could affect the rate of transpiration. So pause the video. Can you think of things that would affect how much water is evaporating from a leaf? Right, you could have any of these things. So for this one, just imagine, well, the first 3, just think about if you were washing up outside, which things would make the wash and dry faster. So a windier day would make the wash and dry faster. Higher temperature, a sunnier day, a hotter day would make the wash and dry faster. If it was really humid or the air was really dry, if the air is drier, it's going to make the wash and dry faster, and then that would make the plant lose water more, so it would increase the rate of transpiration. Right, the last one's a bit weird. So light levels, because the stomata open because of light levels, the stomata are going to be open more when there's more light, which will increase the rate of transpiration. Right, another inverse square law calculation. This one's a little bit different. So pause the video now and double check the answer in 3 seconds. Right, so the distance here has doubled, so the light intensity is going to go down by a quarter. Why? Because the distance has doubled, it's the inverse square law, so the difference in the distance will square that. So it's what, a quarter. The light intensity has gone down by a quarter as the distance has doubled. So if the initial light intensity was 5,000 lux, the new one is going to be a quarter of that, which is 1,250 lux. Right, slightly different question now. So the thing has got closer. So I want to see if you can do this one. So remember, if it's got closer, the light intensity is going to increase. So have a go. I'll go through the answers in 3 seconds. Right, so there's 2 ways to think about this. The first way you could think about it is just purely from a mathematical point of view. So 1 over x squared. So if the distance has got a quarter less, we'll go 1 over a quarter squared. A quarter squared is the same as 1 over this. So if we did 1 over that, you would get 16. So if you did that on your calculator, 1 over x squared, where x is now a quarter, then you would get 16 if you solve that. So 16 times 2,000 is going to be 32,000. 32,000 lux. Right, a slightly different way that we can think about this is, so if the thing's got 4 times closer, then it's 4 squared times more intense, because it's a square law, isn't it? So if it's got 4 times closer, then the light intensity is going to increase by 16. So we didn't need to do the maths in this this way. But we've figured out that the light intensity is going to increase by 16 times. If the original light intensity was 2000, it's 16 times 2000, which is 32,000 lux.